Hello! Many of us are constantly engaging in trying to figure out who we are, find some sort of identity, and there's many tools to that, and in this modern day and age, one of my favorite tools to look at where I've come from and see how that informs who I am and where I'm going, of course, is testing through DNA. I have participated with every major DNA service in the world, including some full genome sequencing companies, and today I want to share with you a comparison of my ethnicity estimates at 23andMe, Ancestry.com, MyHeritage DNA, Family Tree DNA, and Living DNA out of Great Britain. Come along and let's go ahead and compare my DNA, and maybe you'll see what kind of DNA testing might be most helpful to you in your search. So before we go into the services online and check out the estimations that they provide with me, I want to kind of give you a little bit of background on my known heritage. So on my paternal side, I have one grandparent who is 100% Croatian. He immigrated from Croatia in the 20s. I have a paternal grandmother who is about 75% kind of generic colonial United States heritage, and about 25% from Denmark. Her grandmother was an immigrant from Denmark. On my maternal side, I have a grandparent who is 50% generic U.S. colonial heritage and about 50% East German or Polish. They're from that region, and of course that region wasn't as well defined as we have it defined today. And then my maternal grandmother is 100% generic U.S. Colonization kind of heritage. And what do I mean by, generic colonial U.S. heritage? Well, the U.S. was primarily settled by British, Irish, French, and Germans, and Spanish and Portuguese folk. So it's basically a combination of those folk. Many of those people who I classify as that in my heritage are from those regions of the world and have been in the United States since before it was a nation. So I kind of just, it's hard to know exactly where they come from, but probably we can expect a bulk of them to be Germanic and British, because that's the region where I come from in northwestern PA. That's who settled here the most. So keeping that in mind, what we'd expect my heritage to be on paper would be about 25% Croatian, 30% from the British Isles, 50% German, and 15% French. That's what I would guess just by looking at the surnames and the general heritage from my own family records. Let's see how these DNA services like 23andMe and Ancestry.com match up with my known heritage and see if there's any surprises. So let's dig in right here into the various different DNA tests. Again, we're going to be comparing AncestryDNA with 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage DNA, and My Living DNA. We're going to compare the ethnicity estimates and see where I fall in the scope of all those things. Let's start with AncestryDNA, since it's really the most popular and well utilized in the United States. Here, as you remember, it shows the basic ethnicities that I expected from my own estimation of my known heritage. It's pretty heavy on the Germanic Europe with 68%. And it's pretty low with the Balkans. Again, I have a full 100% Croatian grandparent, my grandfather, so I would expect about 25%, but again, it all ranges differently depending on, the service and, even an individual's DNA. And it's likely and plausible that perhaps my grandfather had more Germanic DNA in him as well, because Croatia was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and everything. But you can see a large amount of Germanic Europe, England and Northwest Europe. And when you look at Ancestry, their England and Northwest Europe really covers a lot of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, England, all of that kind of stuff. Then you do see the next largest amount is Eastern Europe and Russia. This is going to be mainly the Slavic kind of nations, and you'll see that's going to be a lot of the Polish heritage probably that my family has, and maybe even some of the Slavic from the Croatian might get lumped into there. Sweden seems a little high to me, but there is some Danish in my family history. So you see Denmark and everything is right there. So that's all a possibility. Scotland, Ireland seem about right. Now, Ancestry offers you another thing here. You can see that, it says, although they're pretty confident that 4% of my ancestry or ethnicity is from the Balkans, it can range from 0 to 16%. Now, on the higher end, 16% is probably more likely in my case, as I should be close to 25% Croatian on paper. So, you can see that maybe some of those different kind of DNA estimates may change a bit based upon that. Let's go ahead and move to 23andMe, which is the next popular service in the United States. You can see that 23andMe, first of all, is much more granular. It's not whole number percentages, rather they do use decimal points, and they also kind of provide regions and stuff. So they, put the Germanic DNA as French and German, and certainly those people have a shared heritage as well. But when you click on that, it will tell you the actual regions in Germany too. When you go here, and it says that my DNA is, from Bavaria, Berlin, which Berlin makes sense because it's a metropolitan area. Many people migrate to Berlin, and then Hesse. Now, Hesse actually does hit the spot on my heritage. My great-grandmother's maiden name was Bilstein, and there is a Bilstein castle in Hesse, Germany. So all of that makes quite a bit of sense. You can see the granularity, especially with the United Kingdom and Ireland going on here. Just tons of different cities. And again, I have no way of verifying this because the English and Irish in my DNA is rather old. But that's where people from these cities have strands of DNA that would match mine statistically. They don't give me as much Scandinavian. You'll see 1% Scandinavian, so not much Swedish. But what they do understand is that there is DNA that is just related to Northwestern European. So that could be Swedish, Danish, English, French, whatever it is. They're just not able to classify it as closely. I do have some Eastern European, about 10% here. And again, they classify this in Poland, which, it does make sense. Right here is where my great-grandfather Broski would have been from. So that hits the spot rather well there. And then I have to go back here to my ancestry composition because it kind of timed out with me. Now for the Southern European, the Greek and Balkan, it's still pretty low on the Balkan side, which would make me think that maybe my grandparents did have a lot of Germanic or maybe perhaps other things like Italian or Sardinian kind of DNA, which you'll see Sardinian a little bit later. But it is remarkably well done here because Karlovac County is right here is a little village called Modrush, which is where the Rendulics, my family, emigrated from. And here in Ligasenge County is where my surname originates. So it really does make quite a bit of sense in those regions. Sardinian, 1.1%. I don't really have known Sardinian heritage or family, but being such a low number, what that tells me is probably old European, pre-Roman Empire European, hunter-gatherer kind of stuff that shows up. And based on my Y haplogroup, which we'll get into in later videos, makes perfect sense. They give me 0.2% Ashkenazi Jewish, which again, it would be in the Eastern European part of life. And likewise, you can see they even give some trace ancestry that's outside of Europe. 0.3% Peninsular Arab and 0.1% Senegambien. The neat thing that they do as well is they give you a bichromosome report, which is really quite lovely because you can see how how everything matches up with your various ethnicities. So, like if I would question my trace, obviously the thing that's farthest out of my typical DNA structure is this Senegambia and Gambian on the 18th gene. And I look at my mother's, I can compare with hers as well, and I see that present. So there might be some validity there to that and something worth finding. Likewise, that's where my Arabic genetic makeup is. My Croatian, all of my Southern Europe, interestingly enough, is there, and it matches up because the Y chromosome, the bottom part of that, is my paternal heritage because I am sequenced against my own parents as well. So it's nice to see. You can also change the confidence levels here. Right now it's 50% speculative, which gives you a large amount of ethnicities. If you turn it to 90%, which is the most conservative estimates they can give, you can see it's less granular. Basically, they can see a lot of Northwestern European, but they can only say about 1% is German. The Croatian still shows up rather, remarkably with 2.3%. Ashkenazi Jewish is still there, and the Senegambian is still there. And then you can go down and you can start seeing where other elements start coming in. The Sardinian's always there too, so that is interesting to me to know that no matter what the level of conservative or speculative, that those ethnicities are still present. And at 70%, I start looking a lot like I did at 50%. So you can kind of see that. It's a neat service if you're into really searching out and trying to find out who you are ethnically. 23andMe, I think, is one of my favorites for that. I like it better than Ancestry. The next one is Family Tree DNA. They're another popular service, especially those who have want to dig deeper into their Y DNA, their paternal heritage, as well as their maternal heritage with the mitochondrial DNA. And I'll do those videos later, but this is just to compare the ethnicities. So again, they see a lot of Central European in me, which is Germany, France, Denmark. That makes sense. They see a whole lot of Scandinavian in me, and although that may be correct because with some British heritage and stuff, Scandinavian can go in there with the Vikings going into England rather than Celtic heritage. But you will notice the lack of UK or Irish in this particular one, and you'll also notice the lack of Croatia, which is really intriguing. What they seem to do is they put my Croatian heritage with Italian, which again, not so far off. That's where that little village of Modric is right there, Italian. And then they mix it with Western Slavic, and again, Croatia is right in the middle of that. They are the old Ionian, kind of Latin race of people mixed with, Slavic people. So I understand where it's coming from, but is it accurate? Not really. And then they have me with a little bit of Finnish. Which I can understand as well from the, bordering on this Eastern European side of that. Let's move on to MyHeritage DNA. This is the most popular DNA service in Europe, so it's good if you know that you are just 1 or 2 generations away from European immigration. You can connect with family and your heritage in Europe as well. They do both the genetic groups like Ancestry does, as well as the ethnicities. And they show me at a lot of North and West European, which is German. Again, they don't show any British or Irish. They show a little bit of Finnish. They show Eastern European at a high rate, and they show Iberian. And it's intriguing to me because I don't have any noted Spanish heritage. When I see this Iberian, what I tend to think is it's just generic Southern European and probably that Roman Empire kind of heritage that is stuck in with my Croatian. In fact, if you look at the Iberian and take a little bit of the Eastern European, which is mainly Slavic DNA, you may start to see, that the Croatian number evens out a bit. They do recognize here that one of my genetic groups is Croatia, which is really intriguing because they don't give me any of their Balkan DNA. Rather, they just say, again, Iberian and Eastern European. But they do recognize that based upon the triangulation of my DNA against other people, we have a whole bunch of Croatia going on, and these Croatians in Croatia and their descendants in Chile and in the United States, Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from, Ohio, and Michigan. And it shows you some of these last names, and actually, I am related to some, but you also see that they share Eastern European, North and West European heritage, as well as Balkan. So I'm not quite sure why I didn't score Balkan on theirs, but it's not the end of the world. I'll take Iberian any day. And they give me Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is probably correct as well. And they give me Poland, Hungary, German, Slovakia, and Czechia. So basically, anyone from the east that came over, east in Europe, they kind of lump me in. Now we can change the confidence level of those groups, and you see right away almost everything fades away except for Croatia. So they at least know through my DNA that there's lots of Croatian in there. The final service that we're going to go to is called Living DNA, and it is really great if you know that you have DNA from the UK, because they are really able to, as you see, break that down into the various regions of the UK much better than the other services, especially by percentage. Now, I would have to say, oddly enough, even though Living DNA is the least popular amongst the major DNA companies for ancestry and ethnicity research, is probably the most correct based upon what we saw in my estimate heritage, correct? We see Northwest Germanic and Northeast Germanic, which again, that's Grandpa Bilstein and Grandpa Brzezowski. We see West Balkans, which is Croatia, at 20.3%, so that's probably more correct paper-wise. And then a bunch of England, too, which would go back to the colonial American heritage. So as you can see, the sites do range quite a bit percentage-wise, but they point to the same base groups of people that are involved in my own known heritage. So here's a side-by-side comparison chart of all the different services here with 23andMe, Ancestry.com, MyHeritage DNA, Family Tree DNA, and Living DNA. And as you can see, they basically all point to the same thing, a bulk of German heritage, which is what I suspected, in my, prior slide to kind of look and see what was going on. The one thing I do think that they're probably skewed towards that Northwestern European, and to be honest, the service that most likely fits my heritage is Living DNA in my particular case. Let me know what you think about your ethnicity estimates if you've already taken these tests. If you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them, as I've been with these services for a couple years now, and again, like I said, I'm really addicted to DNA testing, and I enjoy these ethnicity estimates as well. If you like this, please feel free to click on like and share this with your friends as well. I hope that you have a marvelous journey trying to figure out just who the heck you might be.